All right, we're recording it now. All right, so the thing you need to know about the Mormons is that it's gender equal, mostly gender equal, right? There's roughly about 50-50 gender equal. I think it's a little bit more male than female, but not by much. And it's the only area of the West that has a self-sustaining population. Okay, the other parts of the West don't have any women. And so it's really, really hard to produce babies if you don't have any women. Those of you who have attempted to produce a baby without a woman, you'll understand that it's pretty hard to do, right? LaKyla, you know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, I know, I know. If you get a bunch of dudes together, they're not going to make very many babies, right? They might have a good time, but they won't make a baby. All right, so let's jump to the next thing here. Oh, we got to better know another president. Oh, Zachary Taylor. Zachary Taylor gets a D. He mostly sucks. Another Whig president, and he mostly does nothing. He mostly does nothing. Say what?
Is this a new letter?
Yeah, let's make it letter J, but we're gonna put a couple of presidents here.
Okay.
President, yeah, number J is gonna be Zachary Taylor. He dies in office like less than a year into office. So he doesn't really do much. He does more than William Henry Harrison, who died in 30 days. Zachary Taylor died in like 10 months. So good job, buddy. Cool. All right. Millard Fillmore is our other president, is the guy who follows him. Millard Fillmore also gets a D. Generally considered one of our worst presidents. And all of these presidents are just dominated by North versus South. Everything's about slavery. This entire unit, everything is slavery. Everything is slavery. This entire unit, and so he is dominated by this. He's from New York, but he doesn't really care about slaves that much. He's going to pass the fugitive slave law and some other stuff. The other thing that we need to point out here is the gold rush. California is going to have their gold rush in 1849. Okay, so by this point, the Mormons are already living in Utah in 1847, and white people, Americans, are living in California at this point. The gold rush, I think the gold rush isn't that big of a deal. I think we can keep the gold rush in big letter J. It's fine because it's the only, I think it's the only thing. Yeah, anyway, so the gold rush is founded in 1849. 1848 is when they actually find the gold, but 1849 is when the people arrive to try to dig for the gold. They find the gold mostly up in the Sacramento River area, which is near San Francisco, the San Francisco Bay Area. Okay, that's why the San Francisco football team is called the 49ers, because that's when all the miners arrived and founded the city, 1849. That's why they're the 49ers, right? That's why the Utah football team is called the 47ers, right? I'm just kidding. They're called the Pioneers. That's the name that they should have, right? They're playing, they got a little covered wagon on their helmet, right? Smash each other, Pioneers. Just the cheerleaders have to wear like floor length dresses, right? You know how it is. All right. Okay, so let's get back to Civil War stuff. Leading up to the Civil War, everything is about slavery. Even the California Gold Rush is about slavery, and you're going to see why in just a minute. So the Compromise of 1850 is one of these. This is definitely a new letter. Compromise of 1850 is definitely a new letter. And the Compromise of 1850 is dealing with admitting California into the Union. Okay? The Compromise of 1850 is redoing the Missouri Compromise of 1820. So I skipped the Missouri Compromise back in the day because it makes more sense to put it in this unit. So the Missouri Compromise of 1820 was an agreement that slavery would not expand north of the southern border of Missouri. Okay, so when Missouri got admitted, Missouri was admitted as a slave state, and the Missouri Compromise of 1820 said that along the 3630 parallel, along this parallel here, no more slavery would be above it. The problem is California is becoming a state, and California doesn't want slaves. California doesn't want slaves. California, but those of you who are really good at maps may notice that California extends quite a bit further south, right? By the rules, California, by the rules of the Missouri Compromise, California should be a slave state. But California is A, filled with Northerners who don't own slaves, and B, don't want slaves. California doesn't want slaves, okay? So the US government also doesn't want to have, this huge gold rush giant state to be a slave state. So they come up with the Compromise of 1850. Compromise of 1850 basically says that all of the territories can decide for themselves whether they want slavery. It potentially expands slavery all the way up into the north, into Minnesota, into like Oregon, Washington, the Dakotas, what will become the Dakotas and stuff, that all of these areas will be able to be allowed to come up with what they want. This is going to be hugely problematic, right? The Nashville Convention is a meeting in 1850 in Nashville, Tennessee, where a bunch of people who will become Confederate leaders, they all get together and they all decide that if the North blocks slavery, they're going to leave. Okay? It's headed by a man named Jefferson Davis. He's from Mississippi. Those of you who know anything about the Civil War will know that he is going to become the president of the Confederacy. At this point, he's a senator from Mississippi. Confederates don't deserve their names in regular colors, so they put their names in black because they're traitors. They are traitors. Okay, so here's a good look. Here's a good look at some of these ways that these are dealing with, right? Oh, wait. Oh, I messed it up. Oh, I messed it up. The Kansas-Nebraska Act. Oh, well, I screwed it up. I'm sorry. The Kansas-Nebraska Act was popular sovereignty. The Compromise of 1850 closes slavery off to the north. Okay, make sure you fix that real quick. I get them mixed up in my mind because all these acts kind of blend together. 1850 closes slavery to the north. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 allows the territories to figure out what they want.
Wait, so the header should be the Kansas-Nebraska Act then?
No, put the header on. I messed you up. I'm sorry. I messed you up. The header is the Compromise of 1850. The Compromise of 1850 it makes it so that all of the northern California is free and all those northern territories are going to be free. Okay? But what they get in exchange is the fugitive slave law. That's what the Southerners get in exchange. The Fugitive Slave Law is the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, basically makes it a crime for any slave who has escaped to be anywhere in the United States. Okay? This means that if you have a slave that has escaped the South and is now living up in Massachusetts, police officers in Massachusetts are now legally obliged to arrest that slave, the escaped slave, and send them back south. Okay? Northern states now must enforce slavery laws. Prior to this point, the northern states didn't have to enforce slavery law at all. And so when a slave would show up in the north, the northern states could just ignore it, right? Or welcome them, welcome the escaped slave, as is the case in Massachusetts, right? Massachusetts is like the seat of the abolitionist movement, right? It's Springfield, Massachusetts is like the center of the anti-slavery abolitionist movement in the United States. And northern New York is that whole area in there, that New England area, upstate New York area, is the center of it. We have cases of like really, really rich business guys up there who that when a slave arrives in upper New York, he just gives them land. And he says, welcome, you guys need a farm, here's a farm. And he just gives them like 10 acres of land, right? This has been standard practice in Massachusetts, in upstate New York, in all these areas. The fugitive slave law now turns all northern police officers into slave catchers. Okay, so the Compromise of 1850 is largely a failure. Okay, it's a failure for two reasons. Okay, first failure, the South is pissed off that the territories have been closed to slavery. So the first failure is the South looks at it as a failure because those northern territories are all closed to slavery. The North looks at it as a failure because now fugitive slaves aren't safe in the North. So both parties walk away upset. Both parties walk away angry and upset about this. Oh, come on, dummy. Both parties walk away angry and upset because the South lost the possibility of getting slavery, especially into Kansas. Kansas wants slaves. And then the North is really upset about the fugitive slave law. We lost Josh. Did Frederick Douglass get caught up in this? Yeah, Frederick Douglass is, yeah, he is part of it. So Frederick Douglass at this point is one of the loudest abolitionists in the entire country, right? So he's definitely involved in all these like debates and stuff going on. He is very, very vocally opposed to the Fugitive Slave Act. What was the Southern president's name? Oh, Jefferson Davis. Here he is. Jefferson Davis. He's the guy from Mississippi. He's the guy from Mississippi. He's a senator from Mississippi. He will become president of the Confederacy. And he basically leads this Nashville convention where the South is really upset. The South is really pissed off. And they're like, and the South starts talking about secession. They start talking about leaving the country. All right, let's go to our next one. Sorry I messed you guys up on that. Do we need Franklin Pierce? Does he need his own letter? I'm trying to think if he sucks too. All these presidents are just garbage presidents. Yeah, let's do the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Yeah. All right, so the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, everyone is so pissed off about the Compromise of 1850, which basically just angered everybody, right? No one was happy with the Compromise of 1850, which is why they called it a compromise, I guess, right? That they passed the Kansas and Nebraska Act in 1854. President Pierce is known, the only thing he's known for is basically passing this act. He's a garbage president. And the Kansas-Nebraska Act basically says that the territories can decide whether or not they want slaves, whether they want slaves or not. The big one here is Kansas. Kansas wants slaves. Kansas is like 50-50. Like half of the people of Kansas really want slaves, the other half don't. But there are some significant, like powerful people with a lot of money who want slaves in Kansas. And it's looking like what will become Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, that they're all going to become slaves as well, slave states as well. Utah, at the request of Brigham Young, is also open to slavery. Yeah, so there you go. Brigham Young did not himself own slaves, but Brigham Young was open to owning slaves. He said that at this point in time, the Mormon Church teaches that dark skin is the mark of the devil, and that they are the mark of being the children of the devil. And the Mormon Church refuses to convert Black people at this time. And while the Mormons don't own slaves, very, very few, if any, slaves are in Utah, the Mormons are definitely buying into the racist argument of slavery, right? That they're definitely buying into this idea that Blacks are inferior to whites and that Blacks should be treated as inferior, right? And so Brigham Young is open to slavery. I've never heard anything about him owning slaves, but he was definitely open to it. All right. So the Kansas-Nebraska Act is the brainchild of this man here, Stephen Douglas. Stephen Douglas is, he's a senator from Illinois. Senator from Illinois, but he's a pro-slavery senator from Illinois. Pro-slavery. He looks like an a-hole, and that's because he kind of is. That's because he is. He's going to become famous because of the Douglas Lincoln. He's going to become famous because of the Lincoln Douglas debates. When Abraham Lincoln is going to debate him, it's going to be this like great debate about the ethics of slavery and about the morality of slavery. And Douglas is on the pro-slavery side. Lincoln is on the anti-slavery side. Those debates are going to come up later on. At this point in time, Lincoln is like a nobody, and he's like a state senator in Illinois. He's a nobody, but he's a rising star, right? So he's going to challenge Douglas on this. Let's see, how far do we want to go? Oh, yeah, we got to do Bleeding Kansas. Okay, so the Kansas-Nebraska Act leads us directly into Bleeding Kansas. Douglas is a senator in Illinois.
Is this L?
Yeah, let's make Bleeding Kansas its own letter, which should be L, I think, right? Because we have the Kansas-Nebraska Act as K. Is that right? Okay. All right. So, Bleeding Kansas. Kansas, as soon as they pass this Kansas-Nebraska Act, Kansas basically goes into like riots, essentially, right? And Kansas is going to go into this state of like rebellion and riots across the state that's going to last for the next 5 or 6 years. Okay, it's basically going to last all the way up into the Civil War. Kansas is never, it will become a state once the Civil War starts, but Kansas can't figure out if they want slaves or not. Okay, Missouri next door, Missouri has a huge, massive slave population, not as big as down here, but quite a large slave population. So a lot of the people moving into Kansas are coming from Missouri or coming from Arkansas, they're coming from these areas. And the land is super cheap. And Kansas, as we know, has really good farmland, right? So Kansas looks like it's going to be the perfect place for slavery to move into. The problem also is Kansas also has an equal number of people from Illinois, Indiana, Ohio moving into it as well. And Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio are going to be some of the most anti-slavery states in the nation, right? We're very highly polarized. So we're going to get a series of events that all happen in years, but 56 is the one that we really need to focus on, okay? So in 56, we get our first raid here, the Lawrence raid. This is another one of these like violent mobs of pro-slavery white people attacking free Black people and anti-slavery Black people. And so they raid Lawrence, Kansas, home to the University of Kansas today. They raid it and they kill a bunch of people, burn the city down. After this, in the Senate, Charles Sumner Preston Brooks is going to cane and beat Charles Sumner. Charles Sumner, right here from Massachusetts, is one of the loudest abolitionists in the Senate. And these guys are standing senators during a debate on the floor in Washington, D.C. These guys are senators, elected officials, writing laws and doing their jobs. And Preston Brooks from South Carolina busts out his cane and beats Sumner almost to death on the Senate floor. Beats him savagely beats him, right? On the Senate floor. And the Senate basically just lets this happen. And they're basically like, oh, well. And half of the senators are like, that's what Sumner gets for being anti-slavery. And the other half of the senators think Brooks should be arrested and thrown in jail. But because he's a senator, no one arrests him. This is going to become a huge controversy around the country. Newspapers from Maine to Florida are going to be writing about this outbreak, and half the country is saying this is evidence that the North and South can never live together. The other half of the country is saying this is evidence that things have gone too far and we need to all recognize that we're brothers and sisters and that we can negotiate with each other, right? And no one can agree on this. And they're fighting back and forth. Sumner will remain a senator for a while, but he sustains like long-term damage. He is never the same. After the beating, he is never the same. This leads us into the one that I care the most about, is the Potawatomi massacre, also in 56. These are all happening within like 1 month of each other in 1856. So the Potawatomi massacre is going to be the first massacre involving John Brown. Now, who can remember who John Brown is? Who can?
I know.
Brandon, I know you know. All right, Brandon, tell us who John Brown is.
John Brown is probably the most infamous abolitionist in American history. And that is because he, instead of like talking to people about how slaves should be free, he killed you if you thought otherwise, basically.
Yeah. So and John Brown, he's not, sorry, the bell's ringing. John Brown's going to come back again. He was here earlier. We saw John Brown earlier in my class. Where was he involved earlier? Somebody look in your notes, go back a couple numbers in your notes and find him. He was involved earlier where John Brown swore his life to fighting slavery.
It was after an abolitionist died, right?
It was. Who was it? You're correct. Who was it?
I don't have. I have a different notebook with me, so I don't know.
That's terrible. Somebody.
Is it Elijah Parrish Lovejoy?
There we go. I don't know who that was, but I can't tell who's talking to me. But yes, whoever that was, it's Lovejoy. After Lovejoy was murdered, John Brown dedicates his life. He says, "I will dedicate my life to fighting slavery." Well, John Brown is putting his money where his mouth is, because at the Potawatomi massacre, John Brown is leading the charge with 5 of his own sons, 5 of his own kids, and John Brown and a whole bunch of other people. And they raid pro-slavery white people and they kill the pro-slavery white people. Okay. This is going to make John Brown into a fugitive from the law, where he's going to run and hide. Now, at this point in time, and he's going to lose 2, he loses 2 of his sons at this raid. Two of his 5 sons at this raid are lost. John Brown is going to go into hiding after this, kind of. He's kind of going to go into hiding because a significant portion of the country looks at him as a total hero. Another, like half the country looks at him as a dangerous, violent criminal. The other half of the country looks at him as like a hero. So he's in kind of hiding. John Brown is going to now he's going to spend the next 10 years of his life raising up an army of white people to go into the South and free the slaves and cause a slave revolt to end all slave revolts, is what John Brown's trying to do. And the Potawatomi massacre is the first step in that, where he slaughters a bunch of white slave owners, pro-slave guys. Now, we need to be clear here, right? John Brown has a real conflicted image in history, in American history. He is labeled as a criminal and a murderer, which he freely admits that he murdered these people, freely admits it. But he is labeled as a murderer, he's labeled as a criminal. By modern day standards, he certainly would be a terrorist. But the other half of that is a lot of the country, particularly the Black part of the country, looks at him as a hero, in that, and your terrorist is my freedom fighter, right? So is he a terrorist or is he a freedom fighter? Well, it depends on who you're asking, really, right? From a legal standpoint, he's a terrorist, right? From a cultural standpoint, he's a freedom fighter. Okay, John Brown has come off much better today. Today, he's generally regarded as a hero, but at the time, he was generally regarded as a criminal, as a murderer. They didn't use the word terrorist. That's a really modern word to use, but modern day, they definitely would have called him a terrorist. All right. Oh, shit. Okay. Let's talk about the Underground Railroad real quick. Let's talk about the Underground Railroad. Your discussion on the Underground, let's go big number M. M stands for Underground Railroad. So the Underground Railroad is happening all through this time period, okay? All through this time period, it really, really kicks into gear after 1850. After that fugitive slave law takes into effect, from 1840 to 1860 is like the height of the Underground Railroad, but after 1850 is where it really ramped. The Underground Railroad, first of all, is not a railroad, okay? It's not a railroad. What it is a network of secret safe houses and transportation for people escaping slavery in the South. It's a network of secret safe houses and transportation for people escaping slavery from the South. All right. The Underground Railroad, if we look at this map here, you can see these are all kind of general routes where it's heading up into these areas here. We have a couple of these after 1850. The Underground Railroad largely is moving up into Canada, where slaves are being brought up into Canada. Okay, by the time we get to 1860 or so, we have well over 100,000 slaves who have escaped on the Underground Railroad. Well over about 150,000 or so, 150,000 slaves who have escaped. The most famous person working the Underground Railroad is Harriet Tubman, also one of American history's greatest badasses. Greatest badass, Harriet Tubman. She is one of my all-time heroes. Where John Brown is also a hero of mine, but Harriet Tubman is like unambiguously a hero, right? She's like a complete badass of American history. Tubman herself was born a slave. She was born a slave in Southern Maryland. And Maryland is kind of a weird case. Maryland is one of these border states that has slavery, but Maryland also has a pretty large population of free Black people, because the influence of Pennsylvania, the influence of that abolitionist Quakers in Pennsylvania is really strong in Maryland. And so a lot of slave owners, when they die, leave it in their will that they're releasing their slaves, right? Or they set it where they release their slaves after a certain age or something like that. The result is that Maryland has, like, if you take all of the Black population of Maryland, somewhere around a third of them are free and 2/3 of them are slaves. So Maryland is this weird case, right? Georgia has basically zero free Black people, like almost zero, where Maryland has like a third. And Delaware too. Delaware is in the same boat. So Harriet Tubman was born a slave, and she marries a free Black man named Tubman. She marries a free Black man, but she is still a slave, but she's married to a free Black man. It's like this kind of weird relationship. She was like rented out to people a lot to go work in other people's homes to like take care of children and stuff. She was injured as a young girl. A racist white slave owner threw like a 2-pound metal. A slave was trying to run away, and he threw this like piece of metal at the runaway slave. He missed the runaway and hits Harriet in the head as a child. She's at that point like 11 or 12 years old, and it caused brain damage. That brain damage would forever give her narcolepsy, where she kept falling asleep, and would also give her like headaches, really bad headaches, and visions that she would attribute the visions to God speaking to her. Medical professionals today would probably attribute the visions to brain damage, but she looked at it as God speaking to her. God tells her to run away. She attempts to run away one time, and then she runs away again. She makes it all the way up into Pennsylvania and then up into New York. And then she spends the rest of her life traveling back down into the South and getting other people out. Her nickname is Moses or Black Moses. And she makes hundreds of journeys down into the South, where she meets up with slaves and then escorts the slaves up into the North again. Hundreds of journeys, and she is personally responsible for rescuing more than 2,000 slaves. Personally responsible for that, more than 2,000 slaves. But in addition to her personally putting her life on the risk to do this, she also organizes all these other people, right? So she organizes safe houses across Maryland, safe houses across Virginia. She organizes safe houses across Pennsylvania, border crossings. There's one instance where she was paddling a canoe all the way up the coast from Virginia, all the way up the Chesapeake into Baltimore. Like she was paddling a canoe with like 15 people in it, like a big, giant, massive canoe. And she was paddling it with like 15 people. She would carry a gun with her and stuff, and she would use it for protection. She would do this at night during the wintertime when it was cold and snowy because fewer people were outside and they were able to hide it. She didn't go during the summer. It was too risky during the summer. Anyway, she's pretty awesome. She is a fantastically awesome person, and she gets even more of a badass once the war starts. The war is coming up. We'll do the war probably next week, but let's just put it in here too. Once the war starts up, Harriet Tubman leads spy missions into the South. She leads Union soldiers into the South, where they sneak into the South, and and then they invade like plantations in the South. While the soldiers are burning down all the buildings in the plantation, she gets the slaves out, loads them onto a boat, and sails north. Right? And she does that not once, not twice, but like 12 times. Right? She does it over and over and over and over again. There's one particular raid where she goes all the way down into South Carolina, and she personally rescues 79 slaves in one shot. Right? That's so awesome. Right? And most of those slaves that she rescued, they get them up into Union territory, and most of those slaves turned right around, put on a uniform, and went back down south to go kill Southerners. Right? She's pretty freaking badass. She becomes the first woman in American history to lead a military operation. The first woman in American history to lead a military operation. She's the first woman in American history to command men in the field. She's a spy. She's a spy. She's also in combat. She gets put into combat during the war. Yeah, she's pretty badass, man. She is like one of the superheroes of American history by far, right? And I'm not even doing it justice. You go read a book about her because she is total badass. All right. Anyway, she's also friends with John Brown, and she's going to help John Brown with his raid coming up here. But we'll do John Brown's raid on the next session. Okay. I think this is good. We went a little bit longer, but we're okay. All right, so do the assignments, the 2 assignments. The discussion is due on Sunday. The other assignment, the North and South prior to the war, why the North won, that's due next week. You're welcome to work with other people. You guys are welcome to like work with other people, but you're responsible for your own work, okay? Cooperate with each other, but don't copy each other. Are we cool? Do you guys have questions? Questions going once, questions going twice? All right, cool. Go read about Harriet Tubman. She's a badass. She's awesome. All right, I'll see you guys.